French almost never work. There's the 35-hour week, all that vacation time, and of course those major lunch breaks with wine.
That is, of course, a stereotype, Jeannie, but working life in France, le monde du travail, certainly is the source of a lot of wild rumors abroad.
You might be surprised to learn, though, that French workers are among some of the most productive in the world. So then, why does the myth of the lazy French employee still persist?
Join us for this month's French Connections Plus, where we explore what it's really like to work in France. Part of the reason why French people have the reputation of being on vacation all the time is because they kind of are compared to other countries.
And there is definitely a fascination with France's generous paid vacation system, les congés payés. Many of you actually sent in questions about just that. Flo, give us the details.
Well, in France, employees get a minimum of 30 days off a year, 30 paid days off. And that's a lot more than other EU countries, where by law they have to provide 20 days off.
And that's a lot more than the United States. In fact, the U.S. is the only industrialized nation where by law, employers don't have to give paid holiday to their employees.
And what's funny is here in France, some foreigners say that they almost have too much time off. They don't know what to do with all these congés payés.
But trust me, you do get used to it.
As for French people, they have their ancestors to thank for this very generous system.
Paid vacation days, les congés payés, were voted into law in June 1936 by a coalition of left-wing parties called le Front Populaire. At the time, employees were granted 2 weeks off. It was a victory for the working class, a cultural revolution, and marked the beginning of mass tourism. 2 weeks turned into 3 in the 1950s, then 4 in the 60s, and ultimately 5 in the 1980s. But a lot of people get a lot more than 30 days off, depending on the job they do. July and August are months reserved for long vacations in France, and there are two schools of thought here. Those who leave in July, les juilletistes, and those who leave in August, les haussiens. These rival groups cross paths once a year in a chaotic traffic dance called le chassé-croisé. During the summer, parts of France virtually shut down. People joke that August is the best time to visit Paris because all the Parisians are out of town. On top of les congés payés, French workers can count on 11 public holidays. Paid time off is something French people are attached to. Many see it as a hard-earned right they deserve.
And when they're not on vacation, French people have the reputation of working just 35 hours a week. But is that really the case?
Well, the short answer is not really, at least not everyone. There are some people who work 35 hours a week, but they tend to be in public employment or paid by the hour. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of people work a lot more than 35 hours a week. For instance, independent business owners, they're not even concerned by the law. And as for France's 25 million employees, they too tend to work more than 35 hours a week. In fact, on average, they work about 39 hours a week. So more than 35, but definitely less than countries like the United States and the UK.
But still, 35 hours a week is the legal limit here in France, and anyone who works over that limit is entitled to overtime pay or more time off.
That's right, and this has a name in France. It's called an RTT, Réduction du temps de travail. It's kind of like an extra vacation day. Now, defenders of the 35-hour working week say it's really important because it gives people a work-life balance. But there are also a lot of critics, particularly on the right, who say that the 35-hour working week is the root cause of all of France's economic woes.
But many of our viewers might be surprised to learn that fewer working hours doesn't necessarily mean less productivity.
I'm here at La Permanence, which is a co-working space in the 5th arrondissement of Paris, and I'm joined by Marc Jourlet, international businessman, 3 nationalities. You've spent half your life working in France, half your life working in North America, working for companies such as Apple, Bose, Technicolor, HP, Kodak, Alaris. Now, you have insider knowledge of what it's like to work here in France, what it's like to work abroad. What do you think the biggest differences are in work culture?
First of all, both countries have pros and cons of their work environments. The biggest differences, I'd say, are around the relationship between employees and the patron, the boss. Mm-hmm. I think there's a big difference there. The relationship to work-life balance. And there, I might actually give the French an edge there. They maybe figured out the congé. And I think the general approach to success and money.
Some people abroad say that French workers are lazy or work-averse because perhaps they put in fewer hours at the office. But when you look at statistics, they're actually incredibly productive. In fact, some statistics put them on par with the United States. Where do you think that that reputation comes from? And does it surprise you that French workers are so productive?
I think the reputation comes from decades of strikes and the reputation of strikes. And coming in from the airport again today, I heard it on the radio, and it dominates the news. And I think that's the reputation France has, which somewhat deserved, but you can't kind of paint the entire French population and working class with that broad brushstroke.
And let's get back to the work-life balance, because recently the government voted in the right to disconnect, the droit à la déconnexion. Do you really think there is that cultural difference? Do you think France puts more importance on having free time off?
The French, I think, have understood that you should take a significant amount of time off. In the United States, you take a long weekend off, you may take a week off. You just don't have enough vacation. Thanksgiving or Labor Day, and you don't have time to disconnect mentally and physically from your phone and your email. What I admire about the French is that when they go on vacation, they're gone, and they do disconnect, and I think that's something that's very healthy to do.
In the past, there have been some cases of boss snapping where employees actually kidnap their bosses. Do you think that there's a different relationship to management and hierarchy here in France?
What I've observed is that the French still has maybe this revolutionary spirit, this lutte des classes, the class struggle, and that the bosses are not admired as they may be in the United States. And bosses are people that are firing, laying off people, making too much money, taking advantage of the system. And I find that that's unfortunate. But in general, that is the reputation that France has.
And French people also have the reputation of having a hard time talking about money, or perhaps even being ashamed of making money. Do you think that plays into the work environment?
Absolutely. I think in the United States, making money is something that's celebrated, something, I wouldn't say envied, but something that emulates and motivates people. In France, there's a cultural stigma around money and success, which is unfortunate. And people who want to be successful or want to make money, unfortunately flee France and go to the UK or go to the Silicon Valley, where there's a little bit more freedom and a positive connotation of success.
We're here in a co-working space, which is quite a modern concept here in France. Do you think that work culture is changing?
I think France is becoming more of a startup nation, and that's a wonderful thing. It allows French entrepreneurs to start their companies here and stay in France and create jobs and wealth here in France, as opposed to having to find the venture capital and the mentors and the angels in Silicon Valley or in London. So I think that's a very good thing. Hopefully it will be sustained. And it's something I think for this younger generation, this millennial generation, they're used to this. And I think that's, if France can keep them in France, it'll be good for the French economy.
So it seems like work culture is changing here in France. We'll have to see what happens in the years to come. Thank you so much, Marc Jourlet, for being our guest here on French Connections Pod.
Meals, of course, are sacred here in France, and that includes during working hours. Recent studies say the French take some of the longest lunch breaks in the world.
You're absolutely right, Jeannie. A majority of French people take more than 30 minutes for their lunch break during the working week, and a lot of them take a lot more than that. So it's more than other countries, for instance, in the United States or the UK, where most people take less than a half an hour. And because of this, it's kind of hard to reach people between 12:30 and 2 p.m.
But attitudes have changed over the years, and the real sit-down meal with your colleagues could be changing into a sandwich at your desk à l'américaine.
"20 years ago, French people took an average of an hour and a half for their lunch break, often with wine. Could the boozy business lunches of yesterday be on the way out? Let's ask some real French people to find out.
Pour nous, c'est presque un rituel, hein, j'ai envie de vous dire. Midi et demi, c'est le top départ.
Ça peut être une demi-heure, une heure. Bon, une heure et demie quand vraiment il n'y a pas des masses de réunions l'après-midi.
1 hour and a half, and after we have to go back at work because our boss is waiting for us.
We go outside like once a week, most of the time, but usually we eat at work.
Moi, pour ma part, c'est beaucoup de sandwich principalement, ou alors aller à la cantine.
Pour ce qui me concerne, jamais à la cantine. Je trouve que c'est glauque et on n'a pas l'occasion de pouvoir couper sérieusement.
C'est très très important, je pense, pour moi et même pour mes collègues. On a besoin de se ressourcer et un peu de respirer.
On va parler forcément un peu du travail, mais on va aussi parler un peu d'autres choses, histoire de se détendre. Ça fait du bien après quand on revient au travail, on a les idées un peu plus claires que si on était resté constamment devant l'écran.
Est-ce que vous trouvez que vous êtes plus productif après une bonne pause déj?
Le démarrage est difficile.
On est beaucoup plus efficace en fait, paradoxalement, quand on a fait une vraie pause le midi, je trouve.
Passer toute la journée au bureau, de temps en temps, ça peut se faire, mais passer toute la journée au bureau, toute la semaine, je pense qu'au bout d'un moment, voilà, on en a un peu marre.
According to France's labor code, it's illegal to eat in a place where you work. So that includes at your desk, but some people have to do that. So back to work for me. Bon appétit to you.
Many of you wanted to know about what it's like to work here in France. For example, Kiki Burgess asked us about the different types of contracts we have here.
Well, it's a little bit complicated, Kiki, and I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. But essentially, the contract that's considered the norm here in France is something called a CDI, or CDI in French, a contrat à durée indéterminée, and it's quite literally a contract with an indeterminate ending. And this is really considered the holy grail of all contracts. It's what everyone's after.
The second major type of contract is a CDD, contrat de durée déterminée. And as its name indicates, that's for a set amount of time, but of course, that brings a lot less security to the employee. Finally, Flo, we had a question from Paul Crosby, who wanted to know if government jobs differ significantly in terms of benefits and time off.
Well, Paul, France is considered a civil servant's paradise, and what's certain is that there are a lot of these so-called fonctionnaires, 5.5 million, in fact. That is 20% of the workforce, 1 in 5 workers on the government's payroll, and they certainly do get a lot of perks. For instance, they're pretty much guaranteed a job for life. They tend to work fewer hours. They tend to get paid more. They also get to retire earlier and get bigger pensions. So if you ask French people what they want their children to do when they grow up, chances are some of them might say they want them to be a fonctionnaire.
Flo, there are so many other topics we could talk about: France and the workplace, unemployment, benefits, striking, but we'll get to all of that in another show.
In the meantime, please do keep sending us your questions on Facebook, or you can tweet me at Flo Villeneuve.
We'll leave you with that. We'll see you next time for the next French Connections Plus.